The story happened when I was in college. There was something about my early years in college that just seemed to bring on a slew of experiences that ranged from creepy to terrifying. I don't know what it was about that time in my life. This experience was somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. Anyway, one night at the beginning of summer, following my freshman year of college, some of my high school friends and I were at a party. We hadn't seen a ton of each other in the preceding year because of us all being away at college, mostly just during school breaks and a few random weekends here and there. So we were all feeling kinda giddy about having the whole summer together. I wouldn't have normally gone to this party, hosted by someone else we went to high school with, but they all wanted to go, and I wanted to hang out with them, so I agreed. This is not the mistake I made in the story. That would come later on that night. We got to the party, and we realized it was almost exclusively people from high school, which was kinda nice actually. It was like a big reunion. Soon my prior inhibitions were gone, and that was only partially because I started throwing back screwdrivers the moment I got there. A couple hours later, I was more than a little tipsy. No, I was full on drunk, though not totally plastered yet, which proved to be my saving grace in the story. After a while, a group of my friends decided to split off. The host of the party, Stephanie, lived in her parents' house still, and it was in the middle of nowhere, basically near a forest. Forests at night both scare and enthrall me, so drunk me suggests that we go exploring. This is something my friends would not let me live down, like not ever. So anyway, this group, Lauren, Hillary, Jared, Alex, Hugo, Dean, and the hostess Stephanie, plus myself obviously, decided to go on a midnight walk through the woods. It was pretty creepy, not gonna lie, but in a cool way, at least I thought so. A couple people in the group, namely Hillary and Alex, were pretty afraid, but Hillary wanted to go because her best friend was Lauren, and Alex had a thing for Hillary and Lauren, which was a whole thing and not the point of the story. But because of that, they were both there. They kept making comments about how creeped out they were, and I kept telling them to relax. No one else is out here, I told them. Let's just enjoy this time together. Being drunk makes me weirdly sentimental. We walked through the forest for a bit, and then came up to a clearing with a lake and a dock with tall grass and shit, plus a shed and what turned out to be a boathouse, both of which had seen better days. Now, Stephanie and I weren't close, so this was my first time exploring this forest, but Dean and Hugo had before, and remembered this place. They mentioned that they thought Stephanie's parents forbid them from coming back there, because it wasn't their property, which was true. It was like suddenly, Stephanie realized where we were. I wasn't the only drunk one, and her eyes got super wide, and she looked nervous. Not scared exactly, more like she was worried that she was gonna get in trouble, and she said that we should go back. I told her everything was fine, since she could totally trust the judgment of a drunk person, and because everyone else was drunk. They all agreed with me, except for Steph, but she was outnumbered and not about to go back alone. Even Hillary and Alex were okay with staying. And because logic is a friend to drunk people everywhere, I suggest we play hide and seek. And most everyone agreed. Honestly, I don't know why people kept listening to me. Now, if I had been sober, this was the kind of place I'd be kind of freaked out about. In a cool way, sure, but not in a let's play hide and seek kind of way. This is where things go wrong. Hugo was forced to be it because we were all assholes and told him he didn't have a choice, so he went into the woods and counted while we all ran and hid. I saw Dean dart into the shed, but everyone else ran into the woods. I decided to duck down in the tall grass, which varied in height. Sometimes I could kneel, and sometimes I had to be on my stomach to be totally concealed. As I was hiding, I heard voices in the trees nearby. Whispers, like the speakers were trying not to be heard. I was curious, so I made my way towards the voices. First on my hands and knees, and eventually army crawling as the grass got shorter. I nearly shit my pants when I ran into Stephanie in the grass, who turned out to be doing the same exact thing as me. When we got closer, we realized it was Lauren and Jared, and that was how Steph and I realized they liked each other. We were listening to them flirt and looking at each other, and I swear we had a telepathic conversation about how good they would be together. But that was when we heard someone barreling towards us through the grass. Heart pounding, I turned to see that it was just Hugo throwing himself down next to Stephanie and me, and he looked terrified. "Hugo, what the fuck?" I whispered because there's no way he counted as high as we were making him. We were being real jerks to Hugo that night. He looked around frantically and then told us what had him spooked. I'll never forget the sheer terror I saw on Hugo's face and heard in his voice. "There's someone in the woods." Stephanie tried to tell him that it was probably just someone else from the party, but Hugo said no. He'd seen a guy and hid behind a tree, and this guy seemed to be in his 40s, and he said the guy looked rough too, and just had a bad feeling, so he booked it. It was just by chance that he found Stephanie and me. "He's looking for something, or someone," Hugo said, telling us that the guy was shining a flashlight around. As if on cue, someone came walking out of the woods, and then called out, "Jim, are you out here?" He sounded kind of angry, and now I felt stone cold sober. This wasn't right, and it was about to get worse because that's when we saw the shadow of someone rowing a boat down the lake towards the dock. The first guy walked onto the dock to meet the guy, Jim presumably, and I heard him demand, "Where is he?" The first guy sounded angry, like he was expecting someone else to be there too, and the second guy informed the first, "I fucked up." They proceeded to argue, though I couldn't hear what they were saying. Then they went into the boathouse. I'm pretty sure no one had hidden in there, but I worried about that, plus the fact that two shifty guys were doing what seemed to be pretty shifty things. We needed to get out of there, I knew that, but Dean was still in the shed, which was too close to the boathouse for comfort given the situation. Lauren and Jared were now making out and totally oblivious, and Hillary and Alex were fuck knows where. Why had I suggested hide and seek? That's what I kept asking myself when I tried to formulate a plan. Then we heard somebody running through the woods, but like they were trying to do it so quietly. I turned to see Hillary. It looked like she was trying to find somewhere else to hide, unaware of what was happening. I saw her run towards the boathouse. It was like time stopped. I didn't know what to do or how to stop her. Honestly, I froze. But then Hillary hesitated when she got close to the door. She would later tell us that the voices she heard inside gave her pause. And then the door swung open. It was like something out of a movie. Hillary was now hiding behind the open door, and the first guy stood in the doorway looking around. I think he must have heard Hillary, who was not being nearly as quiet as she thought she was. If he closed the door from the outside, he'd see Hillary, and then we would all be truly fucked. Luckily, he went back inside and closed the door. We had to get the hell out of there, but we still had to get Dean, Lauren, and Jared, as well as find Alex. We didn't have a lot of time, I didn't think, so we had to be fast. Then suddenly, Hugo stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and bellowed. He apparently thought we were in a movie. I just looked at him with a, "What the fuck, Hugo?" expression on my face. It was not what I would have done, but I'll be damned, it worked. Hillary came sprinting towards us, as did Alex, who was hiding behind the boathouse. Likewise, Dean emerged from the shed, and Lauren and Jared detached themselves from each other. The two men in the boathouse heard us too and came busting out, but by this point we were all sprinting away. I swear, I never before nor since ran that fast. At one point, Stephanie tripped, and I practically ripped her arm out of the socket while pulling her to her feet. The guys chased us for a bit, though I don't know how long, because we kept running until we got back to Stephanie's house. The party was still going, and the men hadn't followed us beyond the woods, but we were all too freaked out to stay. I called my brother to come pick us up, and we all left, even Stephanie, who left her house unattended, except for all the drunk partygoers. We spent the night at my brother's house that night. and we went back to Stephanie's house to help clean up the next day. Because honestly, this experience kind of bonded us in a way. Lauren and Jared are now married. Hillary and Alex were both in the wedding. I lived with Dean for a bit following college, and Hugo is one of my best friends, as is Stephanie. Which is weird because we weren't really friends before that. But I swear, we thought we were gonna die that night. All of us, except maybe Lauren and Jared. Even Dean heard what was happening outside the shed and was waiting for the right time to make his escape. You can't go through something like that and not come out closer. It's strange, but also kind of nice. Like we have this shared history, which was true before this because we all went to school together, but it's different now. I wanted to go back and investigate in the light of day, but only Dean wanted to go with me, and I thought maybe it wasn't enough people. I was still pretty spooked, though intrigued. Stephanie told us later that she had told her dad when her parents got home that day, and he and a few of his friends went back there and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. They moved shortly thereafter, not because of this, so we never found out what happened, but we've also never forgotten it. I had just turned 20 in March of this year and started to get out more on my own. I was always shy, I never wanted to go out alone, but now I started to feel a bit more comfortable. I just ordered myself a pocket knife. I actually have a few now, and would carry it with me most of the time when I went out on daily walks. This one time in June was the one time I was blessed to have thought of bringing my pocket knife with me. It was around 8 p.m. when I decided to go for a walk. Usually I would try to go in the morning or early afternoon, but it had been raining all day, so my walk was delayed. I put on a light hoodie and was about to head out when I realized my knife wasn't in my pocket. I went back up and got it, then was on my way. My usual walk is about 3 to 4 miles. I'm a faster walker, so I could cut the miles to about 2.5 hours max. I would take this side street to the main road that had a walkway about half a mile before it turned into a suburban area. Before you hit the suburban area, there was a path that cut through a forested area that had a few cabins and parks. As I made my way, I had noticed a figure hanging by a tree on the far side of one of the cabins. I took a quick glance at him and continued past him. For your insight, I'm a trans male and 5'1", so I would get mistaken a lot for a small 15-year-old kid. As I made it to the end of the path, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that the man was now 15 feet away from me. This dude was pretty tall, at least 6'3". He was well built and was wearing torn jeans and a worn hoodie that seemed a bit too big for him. I began to speed up my walking as I turned the corner and shot a quick glance behind me. He was still behind me, just staring at me as he was making long strides towards me. At this point, I was beginning to freak out. He seemed to get closer with every step, and I quickly took a hold of the knife in my pocket and had my finger on the flipper. The next part is burned into my memory for life. I felt a large hand grab my shoulder and pull me back. I have no clue how I managed to quickly whip around and flick open my knife and swipe towards his face. In just a few seconds, though it felt like minutes, the man in the blink of an eye jerked his face back, bringing up his hands as my knife sliced his palm. He let out a pained yell and fell back a few steps, clutching his hand. It felt like I had just scraped him, but his hand was already bloody and a small pool of blood was starting to form at his feet. He looked at me with anger-filled eyes and then took off the other way. I stood there for a few minutes before realizing what just happened, and I went home as fast as I could to call the police. I answered their questions, and then they took the knife to get a blood sample of this dude. I was shaken from this experience and stayed with my brother for a few nights. A few weeks later, the cops returned and told me that they found the guy and that he was wanted for sexual assault. I was shocked and happy that they found this bastard. My knife was also returned to me a few days later. My husband and I were at the supermarket, and our baby was being especially fussy, so we took her out for a quick drive. The motion usually calms her down. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her, and I was still in the store, but was unsure how much longer I would be, and there's poor cell reception inside. He pulled back into the parking lot and waited for me. It was an unseasonably nice day, so he took her out of the car seat and sat her on one of the benches outside the store. He took a business call and had just sat down, absent-mindedly rocking her in the carrier, when a woman, well-dressed, mid-30s, average height, fit build, approached him. It is not uncommon for people to ask to play with our baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of gold hair, and the most adorable, toothless grin, especially when she's deep into a nap. But her nap schedule was paramount, so my husband was preparing to tell the woman she actually couldn't play with our baby right then. She walked over right in their direction, brimming with nonchalant confidence, and before he could even finish his sentence explaining that she was napping and not to be touched, she picked up the carrier and started walking off. He was in shock for a minute, not fully believing someone would be ballsy enough to do something so sinister in plain daylight. So he said, "Excuse me, put her down," as panic mounted. She remained calm the entire time, but when he called after her, she started walking away more briskly than when she approached. He ran full speed ahead and tried to grapple the carrier out of her hands, finally resulting to restraining her arms. The woman yells, "Help! He's trying to take my baby! Kidnapping, 911, help!" kicking him in the shin and pulling a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her bag. Of course, no one in the parking lot was clocking their earlier interaction and assumed that he was really a kidnapper. A lone man in a Deadpool t-shirt versus a teeny well-dressed woman. Immediately, a man knocked my husband to the ground and was holding him down. He could hear bystanders encouraging the woman to file a police report, but she was doing a very convincing job of acting shooken up and insisted that she just wanted to get home. To make matters worse for my husband, she was driving a minivan. He was in a raw state of panic, realizing the entire parking lot had banded together to inadvertently facilitate the kidnapping of our daughter. He was begging and pleading with them, but no one was listening. They just kept screaming at him that the jig was up and he needed to lie still and wait for a police and stop terrorizing a young mother. My husband finally had the novel idea to show them family pictures on his phone, but too panicked to think clearly, this manifested as him shouting, "I have pictures of that baby on my phone," which of course everyone interpreted as him having stalking photos, or worse, pornographic images of the baby. It was at this point that a man, I can't entirely blame this man considering what he thought was going on, hit my husband as hard as he could in the ribs. It was at this point I was coming out of the store, and I thought he was being robbed by these people. I was yelling for security, so panicked my chest constricted and I could barely get any sound out. It was only then I realized that he didn't have our baby with him. When I saw she was being held by a woman, I was relieved. I thought maybe the woman had intervened to move our daughter out of harm's way while my husband was being robbed, and was walking away to get help. I couldn't find a security guard outside the store, so I ran up to people holding my husband down, waving my wallet, pleading, "Take everything you want, just let him up and leave us alone." One of the men holding him down said something like, "Lady, we need to wait for the police to deal with him." I was so confused. Why would muggers have called the police? I just kept stammering, what do you mean? What are you talking about?" And made out someone saying, "He tried to abduct this woman's kid." I didn't understand and was sure I misheard him. My husband would never hurt a child, and we have 4 kids. If he wanted to commit a crime, bringing home another kid would have been at the bottom of his list. I kept trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly, it all clicked. I looked around for the woman who had the baby carrier, and she was halfway across the parking lot. I went into total ballistic tiger cub mode, and literally leapt out on my heels. I sprinted across the parking lot. I'm not a UFC fighter, and I've never even taken a self-defense class, so all I could do was think to grab this woman by the hair and squeeze her throat with my other hand, which Didn't do much. She was getting away even as I grappled with her. Amazingly, none of the bystanders had yet connected that my husband was telling the truth and that this woman was fleeing with my baby. I yanked her as hard as I could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. So I screamed. I was so scared and surprised that I actually threw myself on top of the carrier, covering the entire thing like a blanket. I stayed that way without saying or doing anything else. The woman left. Not one person tried to stop her, even though she was clearly leaving without the child that she claimed was hers, which would be pretty damn incriminating if I watched the scene unfold. Within the next couple minutes, police had arrived. After all that, there were still several bystanders who explained it as my husband trying to kidnap a baby. The police, to my horror, assumed that she must not have had bad intentions. The first questions they asked me after getting the description of her weren't investigative. They were more questions thinly veiled, trying to convince me not to pursue charges, still placing the blame on my husband. A small sampling. Do your husband and the baby look dissimilar? Is there a chance she thought he was abducting the baby and was trying to intervene? Could your husband have been doing something inappropriate or violent to the baby that would make her feel compelled to extract the baby from the situation? Did she seem groggy or confused? Could she have mistaken either of them as her own family members? They spent more time verifying that the baby was actually mine than they concerned themselves with the fact that the baby wasn't actually hers. My husband had called his brother at this point, who works in an office with a lot of lawyers, and connected with one who gave us the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number, to request copies of the store's security tapes right away, and to escalate our complaint higher up the chain if these officers weren't taking us seriously. Finally, we had reason enough to believe we were being taken seriously, and we went home. We were both shook and cried until we had got our other kids from school. My husband was seething with rage and grappling with a feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do. He also had 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. To the officer's credit, they did ask if he would like to press charges, considering the man was generally convinced at the time that he was on the right side of intervening in a kidnapping, and stayed to talk to the police and apologized profusely when the truth became clear. My husband declined to press charges. Amazing and frustrating, there were still people that stuck around to talk to the police who were giving my husband dirty looks, and one man even implored the police to involve CPS to verify it was actually our baby. For a little background, I'm a scout. I've been a scout since I was 8 years old, and last year I was leader of my team, so I had to do all the paperwork and calls for finding places to camp. It was mid-November. I had to find a place to camp, but since I was lazy, I decided to wait a week before the actual weekend. I decided to call some owners so I could have places to sleep. As I called the numbers, all the owners were unavailable or simply not there. But then I see a number which I never called before, since it was at the end of the list. I call, and the old lady picks up the phone. I do the basic presentation and all. She agrees to let me and the team stay at hers, and we make arrangements. I go to her property to check out everything, such as portable water, the place to put our tent, and the campfire. The place was kind of dark, but it was nice. The week passes, and Saturday arrives. Saturday is ending well, and we did some great games, and ate a lot, and we had a good night show. As I go to sleep in the tent, I stay awake to finish paperwork for the next day. It is now midnight and I decide to sleep because we have to wake up early to go to church. As I switch off the flashlight, one of my newbie wants to go to the toilet, aka the trees, and asks me to come with her. I can understand because it's better to be accompanied at night, especially in the woods. She does her business and I suddenly hear some noises far away, but not too far. I tell myself it's nothing, it must be some animals trying to find food. We go back to the tent, and that's when I hear footsteps approaching. As I hear those footsteps, I remain calm and tell myself maybe it's the old lady making sure we didn't put the fire too close to anything. But I still have an odd feeling because it's midnight, And why would she do this at this hour? It goes silent and I don't hear any footsteps for about 10 minutes. Then I hear more coming to our tents. Thankful all of my girls were sleeping because they would have been scared. As I hear the footsteps, which seem to come from one person, I hear others coming from back of the tent, and I was like, okay, this is getting weird. I need to do something. I check the tent, and thank God, one of my newbies left some embers from the fire, so I could see everything between the fire and the tent. A minute passes by, and a silhouette is just there between the fire and my tent. I stopped breathing. I literally froze. I started to move towards my phone when I saw the silhouette coming closer to the zipper of my tent. I sent a message to one of my bosses, who always camps near the areas, just in case something happens. But I knew she would take too long, so I had to do something, and think fast. That's when I had the idea. I put the alarm on my phone. The silhouette started to unzip the tent, and I actually saw fingers from below. But as the silhouette heard the girls waking up, she or he sprinted back from where they came from. That's when I saw two other silhouettes sprinting back in the same direction. Everything ended well. 20 minutes later, my boss came and stayed the night, and we never had to deal with those silhouettes again, thankfully. Alright, so this happened to me last night. I want to share it with you because it's pretty creepy. For some context, I've been working at a bank for about 7 years, and I've always enjoyed the steady income that it has given me. 2 months ago, I was laid off from my job, and having no other form of income, I became to feel very stressed. One night later, as I put my kids to bed, my heart began to race uncontrollably. I thought I was having a heart attack, but as I began to calm down, I realized that I was just experiencing an anxiety attack. I never knew what an anxiety attack was before I experienced it, so it really scared the hell out of me. The next day I decided to go to the doctor to see what I could do to prevent it from happening again. He told me the best things to cope with my anxiety is to walk as often as I can. Walking releases endorphins, which results in happier moods. I took his advice and decided to walk every night at around 7 to 8. Walking was great. I enjoyed the peacefulness of it and began to meet new people in my neighborhood that I never knew existed. I observed the intricate details in all of the old, well-kept houses. Granite pillars that guided the stone walkways, to the carved maple doors or different sized bricks that somehow fit together to create beautiful walls. The more I observed the houses, the more I wondered about one of the houses that stood out from the rest. It didn't look as well kept as the others. I wouldn't say it looked haunted, but it looked like it was vacant. I never saw a TV glow from a window or a light of any kind. There wasn't even a car in the driveway. It was just existing with other houses. I asked people who lived in the general area if they knew of anyone selling it or if it was being renovated, and no one really had an answer. Last night, as I walked down a sidewalk, I came to the typical street corner that I pass every night when I walk. The corner has an old stone bench, and it faces a vacant house. As I walked, I saw an older woman sitting down on the bench facing the house. When I walked closer to the woman, I noticed a strange attire she was wearing. It was like what you would wear to a funeral. She had on an all-black dress, with a black hat and a black veil covering her face. To make the situation less unnerving, I said hello to her, and in the quietest, raspiest tone, she said, "Hello." It sounded like she smoked a lot. Now you're probably wondering why this bothered me so much. Although her demeanor was quite unsettling, the most unsettling thing about her was that after she said hello to me, she crossed the street and walked inside the house that I thought was vacant. It was like she was waiting for me on that night just to show me that the vacant house isn't vacant.
I never thought I would tell this story, but here I am. I'm currently 27 years old and live alone in a decent sized apartment. I spend most of my time playing video games with my friends online, and don't really have anyone in the real life that I hang out with, besides family every now and then. But honestly, I prefer being alone. It's easier that way. I've lived like this for a very long time. Sure, it gets lonely at times, but my buds online always have my back. Anyways, this story starts 3 weeks ago. I just started my 3-day weekend and had my night planned out. Me and my friend Cody would play some Overwatch while I stream on Twitch. Now, I don't get a lot of viewers when I stream, but I have a steady amount in my regulars that come in. Things were pretty normal for a while we were in a pretty heavy gaming sesh, and this person joined that chat. She called me by my real name in chat, and not just my first name, but my last one as well. I was honestly confused as hell because I haven't told anyone online my real name ever, not even my closest friends. Now this random person joins is trying to dox me. I just laughed it off at first, to not give away that it was me. But then I got a friend request from the same username from the stream. Now at this point I was really freaking out, because my Steam name is different from that I use on Twitch, and the message again said my first and last name. I messaged them back saying, "Hello, do I know you?" And what they wrote back scared the fucking shit out of me. "Hey John, it's Amanda. I don't know if you remember me, but we used to date back in high school." Now, I did in fact remember who she was, all too well. Amanda was this crazy psycho girl that I dated for all of 2 weeks, but she didn't take the breakup so well. I broke it off so soon because how crazy she was. I would wake up in the morning to take my bus to school, and she was outside of my house already waiting for me. Keep in mind, I would head out to the bus stop at around 5 a.m., because I was the first pickup point, and she lived a good 45-minute walk away from my house. And she would also skip class to join me during my lunch period. It was just too crazy. So yeah, that was Amanda. I wrote back saying, "Sorry, I don't remember. I think you have the wrong person." Then she writes back my full address, down, even describing the doormat I had outside. Now I was shitting bricks. I'm a pretty good sized guy, and I'm not saying that I would beat the shit out of a woman, but still. I had moved to a different state already since high school, and haven't talked to anyone from back then in over 10 years. I ran to my window and peeked out. I couldn't see anyone outside my door or the surrounding area. It was around 11 p.m. already as well, so it was fairly dark outside. As soon as I went back to my desk to check the message again, there was a knock at my door. Now, there was no reason someone should be at my house at 11 p.m., and my first thought was, this crazy bitch is actually here. I checked the peephole and didn't see anyone. Went back to the window to get a better view, and still nobody there. I went ahead and opened the door, and there was a package there. It didn't have an address label or anything written on it, just a small box. I took it inside and decided to open it up. It had some standard bubble wrap covering something up. After taking off all the wrapping there, sat the box and a single key, with a note that said, "When you're ready, I'll be waiting." I decided that enough was enough and decided to contact the local authorities and give them the information I had, and describing who this girl was. Their response was disappointing to say the least. The operator said on the phone, "Sir, there's not much we can do unless the person of interest is at the location, and to call back if things escalate." Well, things seemed to die down after that. I didn't get any more messages for about a week, but I did have that feeling of being watched from time to time when I would leave my apartment. I had told a few of my online buddies about the situation, and they were all equally in shock. One of them actually lived a few cities over and offered to come over, but I told him I was okay. Looking back, I probably should have accepted his offer, because a little bit after that, again another knock at 11 p.m. And once again I looked at the peephole and saw someone walking away. They had a hoodie on and there was not much light, so I couldn't make out any details, other than they appeared to be the same height as I remembered Amanda being. I didn't answer the door or open it this time. I called the police and told them about the last call. and that if anyone could come check out the apartment before the person left. This time they did in fact send out a cruiser. After some time, there was another knock on my door, this time much harder, followed by, "Hello, this is Officer Bronson." I opened the door and there standing in front of me was two officers and someone behind them. Officer Bronson said that they did find this person standing outside my apartment, hiding in a bush. And when they asked me if I could identify them, I said sure. We made eye contact and I was met with those same crazy eyes from years before. To make a long story short, it was actually Amanda. And after they searched her, they found a knife and a gun on her. And come to find out, Amanda had gone to prison a few months after high school for attempting to kill one of her last boyfriends, and had a string of restraining orders against her from multiple ex-boyfriends. She did end up going back to prison for breaking her probation and being in possession of an unregistered firearm. I'm currently in the process of moving now, but due to the quarantine and work being slower, I don't make the same pay as I used to. I'm not sure if I can afford to move out now, but I'm writing this today for my own records. And if nobody hears from me in a few months when Amanda is out again, they'll know why. This happened when both me and my friend Jay were 15. I was spending the night at his house, as I often did. It was a normal enough night. We watched movies, played a couple video games, and stayed up way too late. It was about 2 a.m. I think when we heard a loud banging coming from the front door. Luckily, at that time, we were in his kitchen, at the back of the house, so no one could see us. We were spooked because there shouldn't have been anyone at the door at this hour, but we figured it was just some drunk person, and they'd go away soon enough. After 30 seconds, there was more banging at the door, and yelling that neither of us could understand. It sounded like an adult man, and he sounded angry, so we were both pretty scared. He texted his mom, who we thought was upstairs, but she said that she had left for a bit before without saying anything. She did that often enough. She liked to go with her friends to their houses in the middle of the night, so we didn't pay any attention or notice when she left. We didn't know what to do, as we were scared to call the police based off past experiences with cops in our small town, being not the best. At this point, we turned off the kitchen light, and we dug down to the ground. We heard the banging and yelling getting louder, and I decided to see who it was, if it was anyone we knew. I army crawled through the dining room, which was also dark, and peeked through the door to the living room, which is where the front door was. There's also a huge window by the door that you can see right into the dining room through, so I was very careful not to be seen. I couldn't see any details of the man, but he looked to be about 6 feet tall and had gray hair. I crawled back to Jay and we quietly decided what to do. We heard the knocking stop, so we decided to wait a bit before seeing if it was safe. We also decided that going under the table in the dining room in case he tried to come back around, which is where the kitchen was. After about 10 minutes of silence, we rock, paper, scissored for who had the check if he was there, and of course I lost. So I again army crawled to the dining room door. I saw the man standing there through the window, hands cupped against the glass. I made eye contact with him the moment he saw me, and I said loudly, "Shit," causing my friend to panic and crawl behind me. I saw him pull out his phone. He told me later that he was texting his mom to come and save us. The man started yelling again, and this time we could make out a bit more what he said. It was mostly cussing, although I definitely heard the phrase, "I'm gonna kill you," in there a couple of times. I quickly looked past the man to see if any of the neighbors seemed to notice him, but no luck. I crawled back out of his sight again to discuss what to do with my friend. We decided to go into the basement for safety, which you can get to by moving the fridge. Confusing house, I know, but it was really old and not meant for the modern sized appliances. We pull out the fridge to get into the basement, feeling mostly safe but still terrified. I start having a panic attack, although I'm trying to hold it together best as I can for Jay, who is also on the verge of a panic attack. We hear a gunshot and shattering glass from above us. I cover my mouth so I don't scream. Jay and I look at each other, terrified. We hear loud footsteps and yelling above us. The man asking where we went. I hear him going upstairs and run around there for a bit. He eventually comes back down and starts turning over furniture. I'm assuming to find us. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Jay's mom pulls into the driveway, which scares the guy as he runs out the back door in the kitchen. Jay and I get out of the basement and run to greet his mom, never happier to see her. She was shocked by the state of the house and hugged us, happy that we were safe and scared by how close we were to getting hurt. We were all scared after that. After that night, they had a better security installed, and we went over safety protocol if anything ever happened again. Luckily, it hasn't happened again yet, although when I go to his house, I'm still scared. We never called the police because we know there's not much they could even do. Just cleaned up and moved on. This experience took place back in the early 90s, so either 1990 or 91, but no later than 1992. My dad was active duty in the military and had just been reassigned to a new job in the States. For anonymity's sake, I will only say that it was in the Midwest United States. We were moved to the States from Europe. We didn't know anybody, so we had to lease an apartment for a while. My mom didn't work and my dad was barely adjusting to his new job, so we couldn't afford a house yet, I guess. I described the apartment building as creepy. It was tall, singular 4-story building standing literally in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods. The nearest path back to civilization was half a mile to the main road. If you've ever seen the Blair Witch Project, the area itself wasn't unlike the house at the end of the movie. The condition of the actual apartment wasn't much better. As a kid, I distinctly remember hating the drive to and from the apartment. Not so much from, but definitely to. The drive itself was long, boring, and uneventful. However, when approaching the place, I'd always be overwhelmed with a foreboding sense of dread, like a tingling sensation that lasted until I entered my flat. Night trips were the worst for it. Sometimes we dine out or see a later showing and drive back later in the night. It always seemed like the clouds were out in the ominous, almost demonic shape at night, and the building looked completely skeletal. Had we not been residents ourselves, I'd probably assume it was abandoned. My first encounter with Jonathan was on the weekend, early Saturday, I believe. However, my first time hearing about him was Monday morning, just before my mom took me to the bus. The landlady/manager was standing in the hallway, having a loud argument with another woman, who stood in her doorway. I was very young at the time, like barely starting kindergarten, so some of the details might be off. The woman had said something to the landlord to the effect of, "Well, if you're not going to do something about him, then I'm leaving." It was actually more of a shout. The landlady had replied with something like, "It's under control. Go back inside." And the woman yelled back in response, almost hysterically. I remember this part vividly because it was the first time hearing the F word. "It's not under fucking control. Every time I go down there." She hesitated and stopped when she noticed us walking by. We'll talk later, I guess." Then, just like that, she went back into her flat/individual apartment. Mom and I smiled as we walked by the landlady, who I don't recall ever bothering me, but I do remember her looking like a generic witch, minus the green skin and pointy hat. She was old, like in her 60s or 70s, wore a windbreaker and sweatpants, and always had a cigarette either dangling from her lip or between her fingers, about to be smoked. My mom smoked at the time, so she would often see her out in the courtyard or front garden area smoking. Another important detail about the building was that despite it being 4 floors, there were exits on every floor that went to an enclosed metal stairwell that led outside. Theoretically, you could to every floor in the building from that one stairway, including the basement, which I remember scaring me very badly as a child. I had also noticed a man who I described looking like a typical hillbilly frequently enter and exit the basement via the stairwell overlook. He was Jonathan, who was either the landlord's son, nephew, or some other relative. I don't know for a fact that they were actually related, but I'm fairly certain that they were. Jonathan lived in a small studio room built down in the basement, and apparently had done some time. He supposedly did repairs around the building and other odd jobs that the landlady was too old to do herself. She, by the way, had lived up in the attic/loft converted into a 5th floor studio, and despite supposedly being his relative, lived by herself. I distinctly remember the reasoning being that she simply did not want him living with her. My dad would always joke that she looked like an old bat, coming and going from the belfry. Days after school were spent either watching TV with my parents or exploring the small play area in the back of the building. There were no kids in the building, save for me. We really were cut off from society out in the woods. I remember there being this small alley/sidewalk that you could take that would eventually bring you to a suburb. Some of the older kids liked to come out and play baseball near the building. I had befriended some of them, and they would occasionally invite me to play ball. Usually I would just watch the older kids play, while I built sandcastles in the play school sandbox by the building. Whenever Jonathan would make a rare appearance outside, the older kids would drop what they're doing and head for the hills, so to speak, and would often encourage me to follow suit, despite me living there. I never could find out why, and my young mind had just figured it was older kids not wanting to look uncool around an adult. Now, the weekend in question, where I had officially met Jonathan, I was riding my new bike my dad had picked up for me from the department store near base. Since I was still small and not at all experienced with riding an actual bike, it still had the training wheels on. I was practicing by myself on the sidewalk in front of the building, while my parents were doing whatever. In retrospect, they probably should have kept a better eye on me. I was riding in circles and stopped when I noticed Jonathan standing by the building entrance, just watching me. This was obviously creeper behavior, but as a kid, I had figured that he was being a careful adult and making sure that I wasn't misbehaving or getting hurt. When he approached me, I stopped in my tracks. He placed his hands on my handlebars. "Nice bike there," he said in a very childlike, almost slurred voice. "Thanks, it's new," I replied, happy that someone was complimenting my new bike. "I have a bike like it too. Want to see it?" he asked, again in a very childlike manner. "Okay," I replied. What seemed like ages, but was really only 2 or 3 minutes, Jonathan came back from around the building, riding on what I can only describe as an adult tricycle. Not like one of those large bicycles that people would ride in the early 90s, but literally a giant tricycle. I was woed, because it had only been a short time since I had been weaned off my trike. I still remember being somewhat miffed that I was being forced to hand it down to my baby cousin before the move to the States. "Want to ride it?" he asked. "I'd love to," I remember saying or thinking, and actually climbing onto it to ride it, but finding that my feet barely reached the pedals. Jonathan had laughed this weird, almost girlish laugh, because apparently this was funny to him. I was uneasy at this point and wanted off, but I remember suddenly being scared of the height distance. I was a dumb kid and didn't know it was only a few inches off the ground. I was afraid of falling off. Jonathan kept laughing that creepy girly laugh, and I honestly wasn't in the mood for laughing. I was having a horrible time and wanted off, and I remember frantically asking him to help me get down from the tricycle. He obliged, walked over, placed 2 hands on my sides, and lifted me up and placed me back on the ground. "Thanks," I exclaimed before taking my bike and hauling ass back into the building. That was my first confirmed creepy experience with Jonathan. and I remember seeing over my shoulder that he stood motionless, watching me as I ran away. I was much too young to know of or even understand what a handicapped or mentally challenged person was, and my mom told me later that Jonathan was mentally impaired. I remember the next morning it was Sunday, because I think that Super Mario Bros. Cartoon came on, or it was a repeat or whatever. Anyways, I remember eating a bowl of honeycomb cereal and rushing to go outside to play, but my dad had literally stopped me by grabbing me, hoisting me up and bringing me back into the apartment. I was upset because it was an unusually sunny and nice day in October, and I wanted to enjoy it before it got dark out again. My dad had some work to do in town, and a workmate's house I think, while my mom was taking our laundry to the 24-hour wash and dry everything. I was to go with her. The building wasn't rigged with individual washer/dryer units, and didn't even have a laundry room. In fact, the only unit in existence was down in the basement, near Jonathan's room. But I never recall us ever going down there, just that the red exit sign above the darkened basement door looked foreboding, and had always scared me. On the drive out of the complex, I did notice the landlady and the hysterical neighbor woman out front, standing by what looked to be a sheet, which at the time I didn't know what it was. A Halloween prop? But now I know that it was a dead dog laying beneath it. There had been dead animals cropping up all over the property. While many of them had been strays or wild animals, some of them did belong to the tenants. The next day I had seen a white moving truck parked out in the parking lot, and the hysterical woman was completely gone from the building by the day after. Can an entire building itself be the subject of a let's not meet? Jonathan and the landlady were creepy for sure, but the building itself is what scared me the most. I would have recurring dreams about waking up to being surrounded by darkness, and only illumination being a red exit sign, the very sign in the basement, which would always result in me waking up crying and screaming, and my parents rushing in with the lights on to see what was wrong. This series of night terrors became commonplace up until the day we moved out, which fortunately was only a few weeks later. My dad had apparently broken his lease to get us out early, because he had found an ideal house for us to rent in a nice suburb that was close to my school, a park, neighbors, and civilization. Basically, it was heaven compared to where we were living. The landlady was pissed, and she had charged my dad a $50 fee on top of the next month's rent for breaking the lease. But that didn't matter, we were gone. I never did learn for sure whether the dead animals were Jonathan's doing, because it could have easily been the result of a wild animal attack, or some dickhead hunters playing around with a rifle. We didn't exactly live out in the country, but it wasn't unheard of to get reports of bears, mountain lions, or other predatory animals coming down from the hills and deeper woods to prey on the domesticated animals. However, the neighbor woman who had been arguing with the landlady seemed extremely distraught when we had caught her swearing. Her eyes were red, as though she'd been crying that day. I saw them standing by what I believed to be a dead dog under a sheet. She looked like she had absolutely lost it. 100-yard stare and looked motionless at the sheet while the landlady puffed away at a cigarette and called who I assumed was animal control on her cordless house phone. Jonathan was very weird and obviously creepy, even though I was not harmed by him or even had that many encounters with him. I knew from the reactions of the older boys and my own feelings of discomfort that something was wrong. I don't think it's a stretch to assume that the instances with the dead animals and Jonathan were connected, and that is what the neighbor woman was upset about. She had known Jonathan was doing bad, and for whatever reason, his landlady/relative was keen to just shut the conversation down. When I had turned 10, so a few years later, I had learned from my mom that Jonathan had been apparently paying kids around the area pogs, their type of popular collectible from the 90s, in order to go with him to the work shed to play doctor. This lines up perfectly with the reactions of the older kids, the woman neighbor who ultimately moved, and my own sinking suspicions. I know I had said that it was the building itself that creeped me out the most. However, I think my youthful ignorance, naive and general assumption that everyone was well-meaning, had misplaced my fears to the building and blinded me to the fact that Jonathan was actually the source of my discomfort. I'm not aware that he ever actually did anything to those kids, but let's just hope for their sake that he didn't, and hopefully finally receive proper diagnosis and treatment for his condition. For context, I'm 5'3", 24-year-old female, and working as a programmer for an IT company in the Philippines. Now, the area where my office is comprised of 3 buildings. Building A, where my office is in, Building B, and Building C. To get to the other buildings, it would take you like 10 minutes to get there. Important for later. This happened to me a year ago, around the end of February until March. I just got out of a bad breakup at the time, and I really intended to just focus on myself and not meet anyone yet. I just got out of work and it's around 7 p.m. on a Friday night. I went to my usual waiting spot, which has benches and is located on the back of our building, near the entrance of an underground parking. For a company shuttle, and Omar, shuttle dispatcher, is there. Now, I've known Omar for 2 years, and is someone I consider now a friend, and we would often chat about our lives, even the breakup with my ex then, and joke around. He's a 40-plus-year-old guy, and he gives out this big fatherly vibe, so he's really someone that I trust. That night, he was there and with someone new that I didn't recognize. Our conversation went like this. Omar: "Oh, hi, OP. Good thing you're here. I'd like you to meet someone since he told me he really wants to meet you for a long time now." And then the guy stood up and shook my hand. I greeted him, and just to be polite, and this new guy, let's name him Ray. He's average looking and a little shorter to my height, 5'1" maybe, and he instinctively gave off a vibe as soon as I shook his hand. I thought that would be the end of it, but he proceeded to talk to me for a few minutes while I waited for my shuttle to arrive. Omar has purposely left me and this Ray guy so that we could talk and get to know each other. I'm actually quite puzzled at this cause, 1, I have no clue who this guy is, and why he would be so eager to meet me. And 2, I clearly told Omar before that I'm not into meeting anyone just yet. But for the sake of being polite and nice, I talked to Ray, but we never reached any personal questions, exchanging numbers, social media accounts, or even telling him my full name. I just told him my nickname, and left it just like that, when I finally got to the shuttle. Fast forward a week, and Friday again. I got off of work at the same time, and surprise, surprise, Ray's there again with Omar, and a security guard. They were chatting, but as soon as I came, Ray instantly greeted me at this point. I'm a little creeped out, as I expected our encounter would only be a one-time thing. I just said hi, and brushed him off and sat on the bench to wait for my shuttle again. And of course, this guy doesn't seem to know my definition of personal space. Sat beside me and started to talk to me again. But this time he asked me for my cell phone number. I told him off and clearly said that I'm not giving out my number to strangers, and just giving him one-word answers, just to give an impression that I wasn't interested at all. He would ask, "Why wouldn't you give your number? I just want to be friends." And I could see in his face that he was getting frustrated every time I told him I wasn't giving it to him. This happened while Omar and the security guard were looking at us from afar. But this went on until I got on the shuttle again. As soon as I got home, I mindlessly scrolled through my timeline and saw a notification that I have a new friend request. And guess what? It's Ray. And he even messaged me with a "please accept my friend request." I just deleted his request, but now I'm pretty shocked since I didn't tell him my Facebook account. So how did he manage to find me? The following day was the last straw. when I decided to get off at an earlier time so that I could avoid him, but to my surprise, he was there, again, waiting for me, along with Omar, the security guard. Ray immediately runs up to me to say hi, but I brushed him off and dreaded the fact that I would have to wait for this creep again when I saw my shuttle isn't there yet. He immediately asked me if I accepted his Facebook request, and I decided to play dumb and said I haven't been active on Facebook and I haven't seen any requests. He got disappointed and fiddled with his phone for a bit, and then revealed his phone to show my Facebook profile and asked me if this was me. I said yes. This time I was completely ignoring him at this point and playing with my phone, and told him that I wasn't going to accept his request because I don't know him. And then Ray grabbed my phone out of my hands angrily and said that he was going to add himself using my Facebook account if I won't. I muttered a "what in the actual fuck," grabbed my phone from him with perfect timing. I got on the shuttle in a hurry and told the driver to go. At this point I could confirm that this guy was stalking me and now knows my daily schedule and social media accounts. I reported this incident to my manager and told her how this was already happening for some time now. She was surprised I didn't report it earlier, but I blamed it on my lack of assertiveness and fear that I must have overreacted to his advances. We reported the incident to the office security and told them what had happened, and they couldn't do anything at first as 1. I need actual evidence about my allegations to him, and 2. I only knew Ray by his first name. They would need more information than that. I didn't bother to ask where he's from or if he even is working in our office building, which is dumb of me, and I should have asked him in the first place. My manager then decided that I should be at least accompanied by some of the office mates to confirm the situation, and the guys volunteered to accompany me every time I got off of work. They accompanied me for a few days, but no matter what time I got out, Ray was there to harass me. I felt bad for my office mates as they had to deal with his bullshit as well. First instance, when he saw I was with my office mates, I could see the visible anger in his eyes, and he would try to butt our conversations, even if we're ignoring him. At one point when I'm talking with my office mates, he let out an exasperated sigh and said, "OP, can I talk to you for a second, please?" "What do you want?" "I just want to talk to you. If you don't, I'll leave." Okay then. I went back to talking to my office mates. He butted in once more and asked that if I should introduce him to my office mates when I didn't. He proceeded to introduce himself instead, which irked the hell out of my office mates, and as his behavior didn't seem normal at all. After that incident, my office mates and I told my manager what had happened and how dangerous this guy might be. She decided that we should escalate to HR and have them deal with it immediately. Gladly, HR responded and took the situation seriously and began to do an investigation on who Ray might be. Same day, they sent an email that after searching through records, turns out Ray wasn't an employee of our office, and they might need to talk to building security to find out more about this guy. HR also requested our office security to escort me and observe the situation. I honestly felt relieved, as now I feel safe for the time being, while they search who Ray might be. He still showed up even though I got out late, or earlier than usual, but never went near me when he saw I was accompanied by security, but he would just keep his distance and stare at me, smile creepily, and linger outside my shuttle until I left. HR contacted me for a meeting with them and with my manager about some news on Ray. I was shocked by the information that they found out. Ray was not an employee of our building/office, but in fact, a temp in the security office in Building C. I then thought, okay, this creep is really putting an effort for someone who is clearly not interested, and if he's a temp, meaning there's a chance I won't be able to see him after this. But then, what HR said chilled me to the bone. He was a temp assigned to work on the security cameras, meaning he had access to all the building cameras. It has been his way to spy on me, and the reason why he's able to be there at the exact time I got out. HR has already spoken to his supervisor and gave a warning to Ray, and of course, Ray denied the allegations, even if I had witnesses against him. The supervisor wanted to apologize to me in person, but I decided not, as I wanted this to be over with. After that meeting, I never saw Ray again, and I reckon he must have been kicked out after HR issued warnings against him. As for Omar, I never see him as well, and I felt bad. He was also part of the people who enabled Ray, and didn't do shit when I was clearly getting harassed. I received a bit of backlash from the security guards in the building for a while as well, hearing them say that I was overreacting, and I should have accepted his advances, which was disgusting, as I heard the same thing being said by female building staff as well. Nothing strange happened for a few days, but then the security guards, that was with Omar at the time, when Ray was harassing me, added me on Facebook, but I didn't make much of it, and just deleted the request. I'm still working in the same office building as of today, and been totally shaken up by the incident, that I decided to just keep my distance from people, so I could avoid this from ever happening again. And to Ray, no means no, and let's not meet again.
I work at a retail store, and I detest my job with all my heart, and because I was stupid and said I am always available, they routinely messed me over, putting me on nights. I moan and digress though. I'm okay working nights since I get to see my boyfriend when he picks me up. My boyfriend usually gets off at 10:30, but he doesn't leave until 11, so most nights I'd have to wait. On top of that, he has to make a 10-minute drive, so I potentially have to wait an hour or maybe 40 minutes, but that didn't bother me. He'd call me and tell me he was coming to make sure I'm still alive. Earlier in the week, an Uber driver kept asking me if I was someone named Lenore. I told him no, but he did it again and again, this time asking if I was sure. How am I not sure of my name? Fortunately, my boyfriend pulled in and honked at me, causing the weird Uber driver to speed away. I'm a paranoid penny, so this made me wonder if he'd been watching me and knew my boyfriend always came late. And then I tweaked out that since I kept getting these weird phone calls from some weird telemarketing agency, but when I answered no one is there and they hang up, is it connected? I don't know. Fast forward 3 days later, and I'm standing here listening to some music waiting for him to pick me up or call. He finally does, and he starts cracking a joke about how he's glad the creepy Uber guy didn't answer. As we start talking and joking, this woman comes up. I don't hear her at first as I have noise cancelling headphones. She gets closer and keeps calling to me yelling hey. I look over at her and smile and then go back to texting. She does it again. I say hi, can I help? Do you need a ride? She says, and she looks. Seems nice enough, but something didn't settle with me. Her car is parked at the stop sign and there's no one else in it. No, my friend is coming to thank you. I notice there's a man in the driver's seat and that she isn't wearing a uniform from either the store or us. She begins to ask again, are you sure? I can give a ride. Do you need one? Get in. Do you need a ride? I begin to feel a little uncomfortable and my preschool doesn't get in as strangers training kicks in, so I politely decline. I say to my boyfriend, are you close? Just pulled out, I'll get there. Just down the line, is a woman gone? No, she wasn't gone, in fact, she's standing 6 feet away from me. And she looks annoyed. I told him in code that no, she's not left. She has in fact remained there, leaning on the car, just watching me. And she is looking angrier with every passing moment. Out of the corner of my eye, I tell the man tell her something and she looks very annoyed at me. Friend's not here, do you need a ride? Where friend? He probably forgot you. That's okay, we give ride. It's cold, get in, tell us where you live. At this point, she begins getting closer to me. I try to avoid her by moving to the other end of the plaza strip. Honey? So, yeah. What about my sister? Well, she's gotten closer, but I'm pretty scared. She's too far away from here, something might happen. Hurry up so I can tell you. I say in code as a car drives up. Now she looks annoyed. Get in the car now. We give you ride, get in. At this point, she opens the car and begins trying to get me inside, pulling me, yanking me on my jacket. She's taller, so tries picking me up. At this point, I'm screaming and kicking, wiggling away. Meanwhile, I can hear him yelling at me that he's coming, and now he's called the police. Now my mind is running 1,000 miles an hour, and I'm panicking, thinking that I'm gonna get abducted for this weird husband of hers, since he looks content with her effort to kidnap me. Get in, I'll hit you, she says. I start crying as she manages to get my torso in the car. My right hand is locked on my phone and she begins trying to make it. But my boyfriend is panicking, telling me the police are sending an officer. She shoves my face into the seat. Now my airway is obstructed and she's not letting go. She's bigger than me and stronger and knows it. Her whole weight's on me. I'm trying to not panic so I don't black out from lack of air. Her husband's saying something in Punjabi, and she lifts one hand up and leans down, trying to get something from the front. I immediately use the arms I've been using to push myself off the seat and stabbing her in the stomach. She recoils, letting go of me a little, and I headbutt her torso. I'm really scared, but finally my boyfriend pulls in. I manage to get away, bolt into his car, and the Indian woman is now sitting on the ground. After I shut the door, he speeds off towards her house. When I get in, I break down, babbling about how scared and terrifying it all is, and how if he hadn't come, God knows what would have happened. After this incident, the police officer he dispatched got there more than 20 minutes after and can't find anyone. My boyfriend talks to the boss and he was granted the ability to leave early for me. I'm still weirded out by the car stalling in the plaza. I was also a little upset that my war cry was a line from the King of Hill. I'm just glad I'm safe now. This is a story my grandmother would tell me when she was trying to put the fear of God into me. Honestly. When she's about 30 years old, she went to a major city for a business meeting. I can't remember the specific city, but I believe it is New York, with a huge amount of taxis and whatnot. She was supposed to meet someone at another destination, and had the hotel call a taxi. She went outside to wait. She saw a taxi already outside, assuming it was hers, hopping in. She didn't notice anything special about the taxi, telling the driver the address, and off they went. For about 10 minutes she didn't notice they were going a weird way. After 15 minutes she started getting worried, asking the driver where they're going. At this point, they're out of the major city, and she realizes what kind of situation she's in. She tried talking to the driver, but he never spoke a word to her. She notices they're getting closer to a dodgy hotel and made a decision. She noticed he never locks the doors, probably thinking she wouldn't jump out of a moving car. Wrong. He didn't know my grandmother was bad. She tucked her legs in, opens the door, and rolled out. She ran as fast as she could and hid. She saw him go up and down the road a couple of times and eventually leave. When he finally left, she walked down the road to another hotel. She walked in, asking to use their phone. They actually said no, then she demanded to. Eventually they let her use the phone. She called whoever she's supposed to meet and told them where she was and to bring police. They came and she filled out a report and left. The aftermath is that the police raided the hotel and found out it's actually a kidnap house where they forced women to do things. She stayed in the same city where she was kidnapped in and finished her work. I once met up with an old friend of mine, a friend I'd known for a few years prior to meeting up in November 2017. I had actually met this person on a date site. However, as time went on, the relationship between us came strictly a normal one. There were no red flags. My gut did not warn me, so I completely trusted this person. We met up in town, behind a bus station, on a grassy hill surrounded by trees and a tall wall. Our meeting was just to smoke and catch up. The meetup was fine. I had actually started a few months before, so I was relatively new to it. He had brought some new types for me to try out. We spoke about random things, about work, random stuff. About half an hour later, I started feeling very lightheaded and anxious. I suddenly had this strange feeling where I did not feel comfortable at all and really wanted to go home. When I asked him if I could go home, he offers to take me, but I said no. It's okay. He offers again. Please let me take you home. You'll be safe with me, I'm not gonna hurt you. I shook my head and said no thank you, I can take myself. When I started to walk away, I felt like I was walking on a cloud and my head became dizzy, eyesight blurry, but I never felt like this before and I started to panic. We made our way downhill and towards a bus station and I'm relieved, as there's a lot of people around, so if anything happened, someone would step in. I become terrified of him. I had this horrible feeling in my gut that told me I have to get away from him, and when I got to the bus station, I told him I would call my taxi here and go home. His tone was no longer nice but very stern. I'm gonna take you home now. And he began to pull at my jacket. I told him no, that I was gonna make my own way. He pulls my jacket harder and I fell against him. He pulls me into him and told me not to be afraid. I was so terrified at this point. I feel very paranoid and can't see properly. I push him away, rubbing my eyes, calling for a taxi. He tried to pull my phone from me and yell in my face, "Do you ever listen? I am taking you home." I noticed a few people had stopped to ask if I was okay. All I remember was saying that I want to go home. So a lady kindly calls a taxi for me and waits with me, making sure I'm okay, helping me into the taxi. During the time when I waited for the taxi, he kept trying to get me to come to his car with him, but the lady that looked after me told him to go home and that she was going to take me instead, so he left. When I got home, I gave the taxi driver money and told him to keep the change. I didn't want to wait around. I just wanted to get into my bed because at the time, it was the only place I'd be safe from harm. That evening, I laid in bed for 5 hours straight, staring at the ceiling. I don't remember if I thought about anything, or if my mum came in at any time. I just remembered lying in bed, doing nothing until the paranoia wore off. I remember looking at my phone and seeing I had 32 missed calls from him, 10 voicemails and 50 messages. The messages are weird. He sent around 20 messages just asking where I was And when I got home, one is a voicemail with him saying these weird fantasies about drugging me up. I couldn't listen to the rest. I blocked him on everything, but made sure to call the police first. I've heard nothing from him for over a month, until recently I received a text on an unknown number asking how I was. Now, I hadn't given my number to anyone, so ignore it. I then received another message a few minutes later, saying they missed me, that they'd see me soon. I ask who they are, and I get no reply. I've never heard anything since, so I hope I never see him again. This happened just last night, and honestly I'm still a little shaken over it. I work evenings as a dispatcher in a small medium-sized Midwestern town. I was driving home at 2 AM when I stopped for gas. In retrospect, it was stupid I stopped at all. The gas station was poorly lit and completely empty of any customer cars. But I knew the shady areas of town, and this was not usually one of them. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a middle-aged woman sitting on the curb across a parking lot. It's a cold night and just started raining. The woman was not wearing the weather-appropriate clothing, so drenched. When the woman saw that I was watching her, she called out to me from across the parking lot. My second moment of stupid decisions was choosing to engage with her. I was worried for her, so I approached her to see if she wants some help. Hi beautiful, I'm just trying to get home, but no one's gonna help me. I see you're a taxi driver, and I'm trying to get from city A to city B. I could really do with your help. I've been out here for ages. Can you help me? Now, I don't usually give money to panhandlers, but she seems genuine. The weather was terrible, and there's lots of job centres around that are shutting down, so I agree. I tell her I don't have cash, but if she comes inside, I'll give her a couple of dollars. Now, the ATM isn't working. I apologise and told her that there's nothing else I can do. She follows me back outside, idly chatting with me as I get in my driver's door. She then says, "But you're a cab driver," and gets in. I was totally shocked to really say anything. I sat there and watched as she buckles herself in like it's a completely normal situation. As soon as she got into my car, her demeanour changed. She's no longer anxious, she's now restless. "Just take me to my aunt's house. She can give you money." Of course, alarm bells are going off in my head, although my first instinct is to tell her to get out of my car. My gut tells me that if she does, it's not dangerous, but she's already proved that she's unpredictable and high, and I don't know if she has a weapon. Forcing her out of my vehicle, I thought I had the potential to avoid a violent interaction. "Why are you asking me?" I finally said. "Just start driving, I'll tell you later." "No, if you want me to consider driving you, I need you to tell me where you want me to go." I never had an intention of driving her. She said, "Don't worry, honey. I'm not just one of the bad people here. I'm not gonna rob you, just drive." "No," I repeat, "what's her address?" "Okay, it's Street A." "What's her house number?" As I was asking her questions, she gets agitated. We still had not left the gas station parking lot. I considered getting out of the car and going into the gas station for help, but A, she seemed to know and be friendly with the one attendant who's inside when I tried to get money, and B, I wasn't about to leave my car alone. Finally, she snapped at me and said, "Why are you asking me questions? You don't trust me." I then said, "I work at the police department, it's my job," and she flips out, yelling at me, calling me a snitch, about trying to get her in trouble and just losing her darn mind. At this point, I'm more scared than ever. I just want her gone, but my instincts told me asking her to get out of my car couldn't work, so I decided to take a risk. I say I'm not a police officer, I just work at a police department. Why don't I take you to Walmart and see if they have ATMs at work? My idea was to get her out of my car as peacefully as possible and get her into the store. She likes my idea and immediately calms down. I know that it's incredibly risky driving off with a stranger in the car, but it seems my best option at the time. As we're driving, she keeps asking me to take her home. Her thoughts are erratic, literally bouncing all over the place. It was really like a look into a crazy person's mind. Here's some of our conversation. I'm glad we're friends now. I have about 6 people trying to get me. I'm gonna come to your work tomorrow so you can go arrest them together. Okay, we can talk about that tomorrow. You said you're trying to get home, right? Yeah, I'm trying to get to this city. Then I said, I thought you needed to go to the other one. She said, yeah, that's what I meant. That's why the cab ride is $40 away. I said, the cab ride is $40? She said, yeah. You said you had $40. I do, but I mean it's 60. There's now silence. Are you sure you can't take me to my aunt's house? She lives close. I thought you said she lives somewhere different. No, I meant that one. But it don't matter because she won't give you the money anyway. You sure you can't just take me to my city? Now it was terrifyingly obvious that this woman was not talking sense. The details of her story are constantly changing. We pulled into Walmart and she finally gets out of the car. I told her before we went to find an ATM that I need to use the restroom. My plan was to call the police from inside a store, but she followed me into the bathroom. This is where she effectively corners me. I bolt out of there and lean against a barrier. I then said, you know, I have some friends at the police department that can probably help you better than I can. I'm just gonna call them and we can figure this out. Again, at the mention of cops, she starts to really flip out. I kept retaining that the police would help her. She snapped to me that she was going to leave and stormed out of the bathroom, but it wasn't over yet. I waited to make sure she was really gone, but sure enough, not 60 seconds after she left, she came back into the bathroom and started banging on the stall, and said something that scared the life out of me, saying, hey, come back to the car with me, I left my beer in your car. I blatantly tell her no. I saw her getting into my car and she had absolutely no beer with her. I waited a good 5 minutes before exiting the bathroom. I immediately found a manager who called the police. Thankfully I was in a different police jurisdiction from the one I worked in, but I was mortified at how entirely stupid I'd been the whole night. The police officer that responded took my statement and advised me to be more careful in the future. He said that sometimes panhandlers turn violent, and that just recently there had been a report of a woman who matched her description assaulting a Samaritan trying to help her. I definitely learned a lesson on stranger danger. I'm lucky to have come out unscathed. I'm glad that my stupidity didn't kill me. With the recent stories about fake Ubers, I thought I'd share my encounter. Freshman year of college, first semester, I had a chem test coming up, so I started walking to a building on campus, and as I'm walking, I start talking to this girl near me and discovered that she's also in the same class. She told me she's going to some study with some super smart kid and invited me to join. We study in the library for a couple of hours and the kid leaves. She said she's hungry and asked if I wanted to go get some food. At this point I was like, yeah, sure. We go to the Quaboa near campus and eat, the hell's that, and study a little more. By midnight, we decide we should probably go home and she wants to get an Uber. Even though we weren't terribly far from our dorms, I call one and we stand outside talking. Soon a car rolls up to us, the window rolls down and the Uber driver calls out, "Hey, I'm your Uber, get in." I started walking towards it, but something didn't seem right. It was a weird white sedan. I was thinking, this guy's car's crap. Moreover, the man was just off-putting. I don't want to stereotype, but he seemed like one of those sketchy dudes on the side of the street type. I pause, and he more aggressively starts telling us to get in the car. I tell the guy to wait, and I open up my Uber app and look at the car description, and it's nowhere near that of the creeps. I tell him, "You're not my Uber," and he starts getting frustrated and keeps telling us that it's him, until a pair of headlights emerged from behind him. Once he saw those, he started laughing like a maniac and suddenly stepped on the gas pedal and zoomed off. We're shaking now. The car behind him stops in front of us and rolls the window down, and I'm thinking, oh, here we go again. I'm sure they're together. I make sure my app's are right and the car description matches. It's the correct Uber. Moral of the story is always make sure you get into the right car. You never know what weirdo could be lurking. So this happened about a year ago now, with a girl I used to be friends with in a small town in Ontario, Canada. It's still so insane to me, and I cannot believe it happened. For context, my friend had a laptop that was on its last legs, and we're hoping to have it fixed by a local tech store, so she held a taxi to my apartment building, and we agreed to split the $10 it had cost. Once the taxi arrives, the middle-aged man driving immediately sets off alarm bells. He asks us how old we are, if we live alone, why we're heading to the tech store, etc. When my friend tells him about the laptop, he starts to tell us how he fixes computers all the time, and if we go back home with him, he'd buy it off her, and she politely declines. Now please keep in mind that the entire time, he's taking weird back streets, turning around for no reason, and in general trying to extend the ride for as long as he possibly can. At one point, he makes a U-turn in an intersection against 2 rows of incoming traffic. I think we're about to die, I mean Jesus. My friend grows irritated at this point because not only is he driving like a madman, the meter's now a good $20 over the initial 5 ride. She tells him that she'll pay for the original fare and that she's not going to do anything above it. He's clearly trying to get more money out of her. He then reaches up to turn the meter off and insists that we don't have to pay him. And God, I just wish it ended here. We get to the tech store, get out, and crazy cab driver asks if we want to wait for him to get back. We tell him no and go into the store, and not even 5 minutes later we see him enter staring at us. He parks the cab, then proceeds stalking us throughout the store, whispering behind us about how these employees don't know what they're doing and we should go back with him, etc. At this point we're terrified and make a beeline towards the cash, with him following us the entire time, despite my friend telling him to leave us alone. When we finally get the cash, the guy behind the counter looks at me asking if everything's okay. I wasted no time telling him to call security and that we didn't know this crazy man. As the crazy starts to realise the cashier has alerted security, he screams. I mean, honestly really screaming, and my friend, trying to get closer to her, claiming she owes him $30 for a cab fare, and my friend yells at him that she does not owe him anything. The security guards eventually make their way in between them, forcing him out the door with him still yelling. Now thank God the kindest woman there happened to be in the store, who witnesses the whole event with her 2 sons, and they offer to give us a ride home and punch a cab driver if she sees him again. We're a bit shaky, so we accept the help home. A couple of hours later though, my friend gets a phone call. The driver's gone and filed a criminal complaint against her, alleging that not only had she been alone in the taxi, but she verbally assaulted him, threatening him with a weapon, refusing to pay the fare, which apparently cost $35 now. The officer on the other end informed her of a specific date for her to appear to court to appeal the charges, and that she was banned from hiring from the company again. In the end, he drops the charges. She remained banned from the taxi service for another 8 months, and we never used the company again, and he got off scot-free with his job intact. Crazy, I know.